Somewhere in a government ministry, a man types a message he believes only his own government will ever read. He runs it through the machine on his desk, a sleek Swiss-made cipher box, the most trusted name in the business. He watches the letters scramble into nonsense. Then he sends it. 2,000 miles away, in a building he has never heard of, the same message arrives, already decoded. Someone read it before his own foreign minister did. The machine did exactly what it promised. It encrypted everything. That was the point. Whoever built it had made sure they could read everything it encrypted. For decades, more than 120 countries bought their secrets a lock, and bought it from the people holding the key. The company was called Crypto AG. It was Swiss, which is to say it was trusted. Neutral country, neutral product, no flag on the box. Governments that would never share a secret with each other all shared one supplier. What none of them knew is that, in 1970, two intelligence agencies had quietly bought the company. The American CIA and West German intelligence. 50-50, in secret. They did not steal the machines. They did not break in. They owned the factory. And the machines were built from the inside to be read by the only two countries the customers would never have suspected. The customers ran their most secret traffic through it for years. The lock was the spy. And the people who sold it called what they were doing, in their own internal history, the intelligence coup of the century. How they pulled it off, what they read, and the single sentence in a leaked CIA file that finally gave it all away in 2020. That is the rest of the story. But it starts with a handshake between two men in Washington, decades before anyone typed a word into that machine. An archive box sits open on a research table. Inside it, face up, a single framed photograph. A Washington Club, 1951. Two men. One of them will found the most trusted cipher company in the world. The other already knows how to break it. The question is a simple one. If Crypto AG was Swiss, if it was neutral, if no foreign government ever cracked one of its machines by brute force, how did two intelligence agencies come to own it? The answer does not begin in 1970. It begins 20 years earlier with a man named Boris Hagelin. He was born in Russia, built his career in Sweden, and arrived in the United States just as the Second World War was making cipher machines indispensable. He sold cipher machines to the United States Army. He was not a spy. He was a salesman. A very good one. By 1952, he took his profits to Switzerland and registered a new company in the small city of Zug. He called it Crypto AG. And he had, by then, a friend in Washington. His name was William Friedman, a pioneering American cryptologist tied to the agency that would become the National Security Agency. He and Hagelin had known each other for years. Their friendship would become something else. Something that, when it was finally written down in a classified history decades later, its own authors called the intelligence coup of the century. It started with a handshake that looked like a business deal. A government ministry, somewhere outside NATO, sometime in the mid-1960s. The machine has a serial number, a certificate of manufacture, and a small Swiss flag embossed near the handle. It weighs about 7 pounds. The man who uses it trusts it the way he trusts a vault. The Cold War had produced a communications crisis that no one talked about openly. If you were a foreign ministry, a military command, an embassy, you needed to send messages that only the right people could read. Most governments could not build cipher machines themselves, and they could not buy them from the Americans or the Soviets, not without handing those powers a window into everything they sent. Switzerland was the answer. Neutral by treaty, neutral by reputation, neutral by a century of careful positioning. A Swiss cipher machine carried no flag, no alliance, no foreign policy. You could buy it in Buenos Aires, in Cairo, in Tehran, and no one could say you had chosen a side. Crypto AG, based in Zug, a small city 20 miles south of Zurich, unremarkable in every visible way, had understood this before its competitors. By the early 1970s, the company was supplying cipher equipment to more than 120 countries. Egypt and Argentina, Iran and Saudi Arabia, African republics that had achieved independence within the decade, South American military juntas that distrusted their own populations. They distrusted each other, they distrusted Washington and Moscow, and they all trusted Zug. More than 120 countries supplied, and of those, roughly 100 actively exploited their traffic read. What those governments were encrypting: diplomatic cables, military orders, hostage negotiations, back-channel communications between heads of state. The difference between what a country's opponents knew and what they were supposed to know, the entire gap that secrecy is designed to create. That gap ran through Zug. The word those governments had in common was one word: neutral. That word would come to mean something very specific here, but not the meaning any of those governments had in mind. A leather chair in the Cosmos Club, Washington, D.C., 1951. Boris Hagelin sets his briefcase on the floor and orders a drink. Across the table is William Friedman. Friedman was the American cryptologist who would negotiate the understanding to come. Hagelin had sold the United States Army its cipher machines in the war just ended. They had known each other for years. This was not their first meeting. What 1951 began led, over the years that followed, to an understanding between the two men. By February 1955, Friedman traveled to Zug. The documents would later call what they agreed to there the gentleman's agreement. The terms were simple and devastating. The strongest version of the machine, the CX-52, would go only to NATO allies, roughly a dozen countries. Everyone else got the C-52, the weaker model, and the NSA would shape the operating manuals so the weaker machines were not even used at full strength. Hagelin agreed. He was not coerced, he was paid. February 1955. This is 15 years before anyone officially buys the company. The operation exists already. It just has not been formalized yet. A Swiss lawyer's office, Zug, June 1970. Boris Hagelin signs the transfer documents. The CIA and the West German BND have agreed on terms. They will buy Crypto AG outright, splitting ownership exactly 50-50. The share transfer completes in 1970. From this point forward, the two agencies use a new internal code name for the company they now own, Minerva. The operation itself is called Thesaurus. Before 1970, the arrangement depended on Hagelin's word, the word of a private businessman who could die or change his mind. After, the agencies own the factory. They control hiring. They control engineering. They control which algorithms go into which machines. Nothing about the company's public face changes. An engineer's bench, 1967. Inside the new H460, Crypto AG's first machine with NSA-designed internals, sits a circuit board the NSA designed. The pseudorandom sequence the machine generates repeats at a known interval. The people who built it know the interval. Nobody who buys it does. Think of a combination lock where the manufacturer has kept a master key. The machine encrypts everything. The key is just always in someone else's pocket. The later HC 500 series carries NSA-authored algorithms breakable with as few as 100 characters of known plaintext, the length of a short paragraph. The flaw is in the algorithm, invisible on the outside of the machine, invisible under any external test. The machines pass every audit. Every telegram longer than a paragraph is an open book. A communications intercept center, late 1970s. By the agency's own reported figures, their numbers not independently audited. The NSA was reading 57% of all intercepted cipher messages by 1977. Without Minerva, the reported share would have been roughly 29. Camp David, 1978. Egypt is a Crypto AG customer. Reported by the Washington Post, American negotiators know what Egypt's delegation is telling Cairo before the next session begins. Iran hostage crisis, 1979 to 1981. Iran and Algeria both use rigged machines. By agency-reported figures, not independently audited, The NSA could answer President Carter's questions about Iran roughly 85% of the time. 1982, the South Atlantic. Argentina uses crypto AG machines to coordinate its military. The United States decrypts the traffic and passes the intelligence to the United Kingdom. The Falklands War is not just a British victory. It is, in part, a Minerva dividend. The viewer knows all of this. The 120 governments do not. A conference room in Bonn, the early 1990s, a folder slides across a table. One word on the cover sheet, exposure. For more than 20 years, the operation had worked perfectly. Then the people running it started to disagree about whether it should keep going. The twist is not that the machines were broken from the outside. Nobody ever cracked Minerva by force. The cracks came from inside, and for the most bureaucratic of reasons. A handful of governments had begun to notice something. Messages seemed to be anticipated. Sources seemed to be burned in ways that correlated with what had been sent over crypto AG machines. Nothing was proven, but suspicion is a slow acid. The decisive crack was more bureaucratic than dramatic. In 1990, Germany reunified. Inside the BND, selling compromised machines to developing nations began to feel like something different than intelligence work. The intelligence return was real, so was the exposure risk. The BND ran the calculation. In 1993, the BND sold its 50% stake to the CIA. The price was approximately $17 million. The operation had been called Thesaurus. Then, in 1987, it became Rubikon. Now it was CIA only. The CIA was now the sole owner of a Swiss encryption company, trusted by governments on every inhabited continent. The Germans left. The Americans stayed. And the machine kept selling. A loading dock in Zug, Switzerland, around 2018. No ceremony, no announcement. The last machines are being moved out of the building. The CIA sells the assets of Crypto AG to two successor companies. The nameplate comes off the door. This is where the ledger gets opened. What each intelligence payoff cost on the other side of the transaction. Egypt came to Camp David in September 1978, believing it was negotiating in private. Its cables home were being read. According to reporting by the Washington Post, American officials knew what Egypt's delegation was telling Cairo before the next session began. The peace was real, the privacy was not. Iranian officials managing the hostage crisis believed their communications were secure. They were not. Agency-reported figures indicate the NSA could answer roughly 85% of President Carter's questions about Iran from the intercepts. A figure drawn from internal records, not independently audited. 444 days. Every encrypted message from Tehran an open letter. Argentina's military coordinated the Falklands campaign over crypto AG machines. The United States decrypted the traffic and passed it to the United Kingdom. Argentine field commanders were sending coordinates that arrived in London before they arrived at their own forward units. The machines did exactly what they were designed to do. The design was the point. These are not interpretations. These are what happened. The formal count, as the agencies reported it, more than 120 countries supplied, roughly 100 of them actively exploited. From the 1970 purchase until roughly 2018, 5 decades, a single company in Zug sold governments around the world a lock that the sellers had always been able to open. The CIA's own internal history described the operation in one phrase: the intelligence coup of the century. They wrote that about themselves. And then, on February 11, 2020, it all came out. The Washington Post, the German broadcaster ZDF, and Swiss television SRF published the story together, drawn from a leaked CIA internal history titled Minerva, a history. 50 years of reading the world's secrets, named at last in a single classified file that was never meant to be seen. Crypto AG is gone. The successor companies carry on under different names. The building in Zug is empty. In ministry buildings across 100 countries, machines still sit on shelves, some still running. The governments that bought them have only recently learned, or have not yet learned, what they purchased. The CIA held Minerva until it was no longer useful. Then it simply stopped.